2016 has been a great year for FX Medicine. We've celebrated the first anniversary of our dedicated website, fxmedicine.com.au. And we're also very honoured and proud to be the recipients of the Complementary Medicines Australia CMA Award for Most Outstanding Contribution to Research, Education and Training. We love bringing you relevant content which is designed to improve safety and clinical proficiency. We're so very grateful for your continued support, and please do let us know what topics you'd like us to cover in the future by dropping us a line on fxmedicine.com.au, Twitter or Facebook. This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining me on the line today, all the way from God's country, that is the Gold Coast in Australia, is Rebecca Guild. Rebecca studied naturopathy and Western herbal medicine at the Academy of Natural Therapies and graduating in 2003. Beck's worked in pharmacy, her own clinic, in varying capacities for one of Australia's largest practitioner supplement companies, and more recently as the editor and curator for FX Medicine. Rebecca is now involved in complementary medicine education, sales and marketing, digital and social media, and she's a passionate advocate of naturopathic medicine in the integrative health model. She has a keen interest in the regulatory landscape of naturopathic medicine and likes to inspire current and future students to strive for meaningful careers in the industry. Now, today's podcast will investigate the practical aspects of treating newborns and toddlers, which she has some experience. So we'll get into how you get that yucky medicine into miserable kids who traditionally refuse natural medicine, let alone pharmaceutical drugs. I'd love to welcome Rebecca Guild to FX Medicine. Welcome, Beck. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
Now, Beck, you and I have worked so closely over the years. You're basically like my sister. And I've got to say, I'll tell our listeners, like I really do admire you. I remember years ago how I recommended you for a position, and you have just blossomed since that day. And I truly think you're extremely powerful woman, mother, wife to Aaron, and I just think you're an incredible human being, and I'd like to really honour you. So, yeah, thanks for all your work.
Wow, thank you. Thankfully, you can't see me blushing
through
the magic of audio.
You so owe me coffee. Beck, take our listeners through your background, because you've got a nice little interesting story about how you became interested in natural medicine and indeed how your career progressed.
Right. Yeah, I do. So I suppose to a lot of people that I've spoken to over the years, natural medicine tends to be some kind of calling or something that they've had a really prolonged interest in, or perhaps something that they've been drawn to through illness of their own. And my story is nothing like that. So for me, I actually had a gap year between high school and college, and I moved interstate and sort of lived away from my family. And on returning, which I promised my mother I would do to come to uni, I got a job in a day and night chemist, which was perfect because they needed a junior and I needed a job that I could work at night and go to uni during the day. And it just was this job, really, that opened my eyes to natural medicine. I was in a pharmacy that was in a tourist area in Surfers Paradise, and a large part of why I was hired was because I could speak Japanese. So I was, a lot of the time, I was speaking Japanese about products like Blackmores and Nature's Own and bioorganics, all these things that, were traditionally in pharmacy back then. But I became, through their intense interest in fish oil and evening primrose oil and all these anti-aging supplements, that's how I got interested in it, was speaking to Japanese people in Japanese about supplementation. So the next thing I know, I for the life of me, I don't know how or why I took the leap of faith. It's so not like me. But I was talking to the pharmacist about how I was so very interested in the supplements and how does one learn more about that. And he sort of said, well, that's a naturopath. Never heard of a naturopath before in my life, never visited one, come from a family where you have a sniffle, you go to the doctor.
Yeah.
So, that is what drew me into the industry, I suppose. And then from there, enrolled to study and was just enamored, really, by everything to do with food and herbs and supplements as well, which obviously was a large reason why I sought that industry out in the first place. So, going along that time period, I finished college, and I think with our college education, they prepare us quite well for the prospect of being a clinician in clinic. But in a lot of ways, and perhaps this has gotten better since I graduated quite a while ago, but in a lot of ways, they don't prepare us for these alternate career bands. And so when I graduated, I had an opportunity to go into a clinic with a friend and colleague that I'd studied with, and she'd done acupuncture. And she was opening a business, and she said, look, I need a naturopath. I think you'd be great. Let's work together. So I went into the clinic, and we were right opposite a primary school. So I did, in essence, work a lot with children. But it wasn't for me. I got into clinic and I thought, yes, great, I'm such a success. I was in my own business and this is really great. And I really struggled to get up in the morning and go to work and enjoy myself. And it was a foreign feeling because for years I got up and went to work and bounced into work in the pharmacy and just loved every minute of it. So I knew straight away something wasn't right. And so I had to really sit down and reassess what it was that put me here in the first place, as in put me here in natural medicine. And that's when I went, well, hang on, it was kind of supplements. I'm going to seek out a role where I can really delve into that more deeply. And that is how I landed my job at Bioceuticals. I applied to a couple of companies and Bioceuticals flew me to Sydney like within 24 hours of my resume going through, and I sort of, it was a whirlwind. I had a job within a few days, and I was just so very blessed for it to happen the way it did, and I couldn't ask for.
Yeah, but it didn't happen by luck. That's because of your acumen.
Well, yes, thank you, but I just think I was at the right place at the right time with a good skill set and perhaps a decent head on my shoulders for someone who at the time was quite young. And I don't know, I was in Bioceuticals in the customer service department and then progressed out into the field as a sales rep and later a manager. And just every element every touch point that I've been in the company has taught me new skills. And I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be the curator of FX medicine if I didn't have that really great kind of career progression.
I want to go back a little bit because I want to concentrate on treating children. And you said you had a clinic across from a school. Can you take our listeners through what sort of patients you saw and what sort of conditions you helped to treat?
Well, at the time I did see quite a few children, and it was, interestingly, it wasn't a lot of acute stuff. I think that back then people didn't see naturopaths when they had colds and flus. They kind of saw naturopaths when, they kind of had really complicated health issues and they maybe sought advice in a load of other locations. But in particular with kids with cognitive development issues or, learning or behavioural issues, those were the things that I was seeing when I was in clinic. So mainly in kids between sort of 4 and 10 mainly.
Yeah.
But I also saw quite a few older women from menopause and things like that, which for me at the time I was in my early 20s, and I found that a struggle because they often didn't trust my advice, being that I was a young female and I couldn't possibly know what they were going through. So that was a challenge. But yeah, mostly, and what I remember most fondly of my time in clinic was working with kids. And I suppose too, because back then I was coaching a little bit hockey and things like that, it also brought a few people in to see me as well.
Yeah. So you said that you saw children with chronic issues and particularly cognitive issues. This was obviously before the age of iodine. That we didn't know about Professor Creswell Eastman's work back then, about the deficiency and just how insidious it was, indeed how prevalent it was throughout Australia. Did you see much, or did you twig to issues of iodine, or that you might attribute now to iodine that you might have treated differently back then?
You know, I look back now at the kind of practitioner I was, obviously too, being a fairly recent graduate, and just cringe at perhaps some of the choices I made, which were largely herbal, because it was an area of comfort for me. And also to try, you know, we're talking about 2003, 2004, 2005. I do think that what we had available to us in terms of taste and palatability were also a pretty big issue. But to be honest with you, iodine was not even a blip on my radar back then. I think that it hadn't been investigated to the level it is now, whereas nowadays, yes, absolutely, I would consider iodine status as something to definitely check for. And same with, you know, even methylation, hardly ever spoken about, whereas I think it's perhaps underlying in a lot of issues. But definitely diet, and definitely I did use some herbal formulas. And we did have a few kind of nutritional products back then that combined protein, vitamins, minerals, and a few herbs, which actually you can't get now. But those were kind of the things I would have reached for back then. Diet fundamentally was what you would have to change. I used to do diet diaries, and I'd just circle. I'd have like a different coloured pen for the different key elements, like dairy and wheat, and you would circle it, and then that would be the entire diet is wheat and dairy. And so if you didn't have to remove it, but just restricting it down and adding in more vegetables, and you would get these really great and positive results with their concentration and their focus. And possibly now, and particularly after listening to Perlmutter on the weekend, you know, just calming down inflammation in their neurological system was pretty much what it seems to come down to.
What I think is interesting, though, is the things that you mentioned that, you know, have evolved with regards to methylation, and now we're looking at SNPs, so we're measuring these. Whereas before we might have had an approach, look at behaviour with folic acid or something. And let's face it, naturopaths were doing that a generation before medicotes were even accepting folic acid.
You know, we learned in naturopathic college that, you know, the universal cofactors for every enzymatic reaction in the body was zinc, B6 and magnesium. So to always consider, you know, whether people were getting enough of that from their diet or if we needed to supplement with it. And just those three nutrients alone, you could make profound changes to their health. And so I think we were doing it, but we perhaps didn't realise all the mechanisms by which it was affecting change.
That's right. What I think is interesting is back in my day of nursing, when I didn't believe in natural medicine at all, I think it's interesting that, you know, people say, I believe in that stuff. It doesn't require your belief. But anyway, you know, when I was totally against natural medicine and thought it was all hoo-ha, I remember reading things about basically naysaying or arguing against the restriction of dairy in conditions like, for instance, asthma. And I remember reading the article saying that it didn't increase mucus, but it did affect gaseous exchange. And then that was it. Drops mic, walks away. No further investigation. Hang on, it did affect gaseous exchange? And you're not going to investigate this further in something like asthma? I thought that was a real sort of what? But anyway, it didn't twig back then. Now it twigs. And it's like, wow, how small-minded researchers were back then, basically in just saying, therefore disproven, see you later, bye. Whereas that was really an important issue that they should have gone, but wait, there's something to this.
But this is historically the problem with maybe more modern medical approaches, is they're looking for that one thing, that one genetic variant that they can tap into, or that one pathway in the body that they can tap into, instead of really understanding that the body has so many layers of interconnectedness and you can't just view these things in isolation. So now with the way things are progressing, and particularly with integrative and functional medicine experts who can view this stuff in a much more imaginative way, I think now we're starting to get to the point where we've actually got some academics who can talk to the modern medico academics and really make them understand that they're being a little bit too insular in the way they're looking at this stuff. And that's what's going to progress us forward with research in medicine and these paradigms.
Absolutely. And just, I guess, incorporating my comment about Professor Creswell Eastman and his land-breaking research on, a mineral deficiency, iodine, which has resurfaced because we have an old continent called Australia. But just going on from there, what sort of things would you do differently now, looking back on that practice?
I think even though I was making dietary changes, I don't think even then I personally had enough buy-in into just how profound food can be as medicine.
Right.
I think now there's a whole movement to that, and because of, let's say, social media in particular, and the movement to understand how we can incorporate low allergenic foods and make them into really delicious dishes, because there's this chronic sharing of information and content thanks to the internet and in particular social media. I think now I could be far more imaginative and also offer parents so many more resources. There's so many more cookbooks and there's so many more websites that you could direct them to, and therefore you could probably affect change a lot faster. Yeah. And definitely, obviously, the supplementation or the availability of treatments now versus 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah. There's been a lot more refinement, hasn't there?
Yeah, a lot more refinement. And also in this country, we've also got far more access to things. And in particular in the last 12 to 18 months, with so many more nutrients and herbs and things that are listed ingredients that we can actually use now, whereas we didn't necessarily have them. And even dosages have changed. Like things like CoQ10, back then you could only get like 20 milligrams. And nowadays you can buy 300 milligrams in one capsule. These kinds of things are a revelation. Yeah. Or 500 billion organisms in a sachet or a powder or even in a capsule, I'm sure, in the not too distant future, whereas we were using 100 million back then in a capsule. It's just so different how far we've progressed.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious back then where people would go, this has got 10 billion? Wow. That was, whoa. Whereas 5 billion was the norm.
Yeah. Or people going, oh, no, I think that's a little bit too strong.
But I think what you said earlier, Beck, about regarding, changes to diet, for instance, I don't subscribe to the necessarily wholesale restriction of wheat and dairy. That's my view. However, I think if there's a health issue that might respond to it, it's worth a try if you've tried everything else and it doesn't work. So I really think these are important dietary approaches when, as you said, you use different pens and you were circling all of these foods that were in that food group alone with the restriction of these other healthy food groups. And that comes down to the message that we're getting across to people was not a healthy, balanced diet. It was concentrate on wheat and dairy because they're easy.
Yeah, and it was what we were taught. But I agree with you. I don't like to demonise any food group. I think that it's much better to teach people to have a healthy relationship with food, and in particular with kids. There's no other important patient group than with children, to teach them to have a healthy relationship with food, but also a healthy understanding with how food works in their body, why they would choose a certain food over a not so healthy food, or this idea or this concept of sometimes food. I know now, and this is part of the reason why I would definitely do things more differently, is when you're a parent, you are constantly in this pick your battles kind of,
Absolutely.
And it's easy to be the practitioner sitting across from a parent, shaking your head going, just don't give them this stuff. But when maybe they are a fussy eater and you're deeply concerned they're not getting enough nutrition, I know we can fall into this habit of, we'll just give them anything rather than have nothing. But, the demonising of food groups, I don't subscribe to that either. However, I think that there is a very good call for the judicious removal of certain food groups for a period of time,
Yes.
because they can become things that target our inflammatory and our immune system.
Yeah.
And you need to kind of remove these agents so that the immune system in the body can kind of calm down and reset and come back to a sense of balance. And then you can introduce them. So this is where that whole concept of rotation elimination diet kind of come in. But I think what happens is with people, with patients in particular, we need to really get better at explaining to them that just because you rotate, eliminate, and maybe you haven't reacted, doesn't mean you can have it every day for 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
There's sort of a set point at which you need to have it. And so it can't be all the time. You have like a really good rotation of foods through the diet. Otherwise, the body might not be telling you that it's reacting to it because it's got inflammation at such a high rate to cope with that constant stressor on the system. So, yeah, it's definitely a judicious removal of it. And then that's why some people go, oh, well, I removed it and now I react to it. Well, no, it's not about now you react to it. It's about now your, cortisol and your inflammatory coping mechanisms aren't at this maximum surveillance level. They've actually dropped down because they feel like the threat has been reduced. And so the next time you have it, the immune system comes in and just, sends it into chaos. So there's that kind of food removal, food adding back in, or use of food. It's so interesting, but I think it becomes really difficult for people to understand. I still haven't found a really great way to necessarily get that across to people.
Yeah. So, well, actually, you're really good at it. Like, one of the things I loved about what you said there was about how you talk to the child, your child as a parent, or your patient child as a practitioner, and how you engage them in actively choosing the right sort of foods. So, I just think we really, as practitioners, we need to be really confident and clear about, as you say, not demonising a food, but using the correct choices, if you like, to choose the good ones. So the child feels in control rather than mummy makes me eat this or daddy makes me eat this. The second one there, of course, is the correct messages to the parents so that they choose the right foods to purchase. And I've got to say, one of the best ways I've found for this, when there's a particular issue that you might need some sort of directed diet, is Victus Health. I can't applaud those ladies enough. The work that they've done in not just saying, oh, here's a food list, don't eat those and do eat these. Well, they're in abundance throughout the internet. You can get them anywhere. But how will that food look on your table? Now that is the key. That's where Victus Health shines. So it shows you what that good meal will look like. Now we have something that I'd like to eat.
It's a really great resource for teaching people at that very initial stage when they've first been faced or confronted with the fact that they have to remove or restrict a certain food group. And it's just so overwhelming because I remember I was actually a naturopath working in a health food environment once pointed this out. And I probably hadn't put a lot of thought into it until it was her that mentioned it to it and just said that often what happens with naturopaths, they're really great at telling people what they can't eat, but not necessarily at what they can.
Yeah.
So, she felt like her role within health food was to be that next step in the chain to teach people to implement some of the changes maybe that they've been asked to do by their, clinical practitioner. So, and it's really true. And Victus bridges that gap. It gives the practitioner in clinic who doesn't have hours and hours and hours to sit down and fundamentally coach them through what to do, but it gives them that next step, somewhere they can go for the information, where they can maybe input some of their favourite family dishes like spag bowl or, chicken cacciatore or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But then, choose out the various allergens that you can't have during that restriction phase. And it'll populate a way to make that food, but in a way that reflects what you need in that current health issue. So it's very, very right. And to go back to your point about the correct messages to parents and to kids, I think one of the biggest learnings I've had as a parent is that just because I don't eat it, me as an adult, doesn't mean my child won't eat it. You know, there's not a lot of things I don't eat, but I definitely don't eat peas and I don't eat beans. But I serve them up to my son just because, you know, he might like those foods. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of eating an abundance of fruit, but my son will eat so much fruit all the time, and he loves it. And I'm so glad that he has that healthy engagement with food, that he reaches for the fruit bowl before he sticks his head in the pantry to look for things that are in a packet.
Yeah.
And I think that he was definitely showing signs of being a fussy eater, and I had lots of conversations with my mother about this because I was a chronically fussy eater. And what I think over time is that sometimes we as parents, like I said earlier, you have to pick your battles. But I think that what can happen is that just because it's easy, we're so tired, we're worn out, we don't necessarily want to go into a battle with our child about what they're eating or their food. So sometimes we choose the path of less resistance, and we might give in to, you know, they want noodles or they want, you know, 2-minute noodles it was for me as a child. Gosh, I could have lived on those. But, you know, these days I cringe to think about that.
Please cringe.
One of the, yeah, they're terrible. But I think I didn't have an understanding until I went to college and learnt naturopathy about how those foods fueled my body. I legitimately went to college thinking, well, at the very least, I'll learn what vitamins I can take to make up for the fact that I don't eat well. And, you know, oops, more for me, because what I learnt was you can throw all the best supplements and all the best herbal ingredients at a person or a child or an adult, but if you haven't got their diet right, you know, that's the landscape from the springboard from which everything else comes from. If you haven't got that right, it is like flogging a dead horse.
Yeah, it's just like
you're going to get nowhere.
It's just like building a house, a gorgeous palatial house on shoddy foundations. It ain't going to last long, mate.
Yeah, it's going to sink, and you're going to have cracked walls and dodgy ceilings, and you've got to get that right first. And I think we need to be teaching kids how certain foods fuel their body. So I know when my son started to show fussy eating tendencies, I started small with, you know, one vegetable at a time. Let's eat some carrots, because you know how you said you're afraid of the dark? Well, actually, if you eat carrots, they help with your night vision, and you'll be able to see better. And, you know, it's got vitamin A. And so now when we sit at the kitchen table, he says, what is this good for? And what's that good for? And what does this do? So some of them might be slight half-truths and things I've just come up with so that I can give him a really holistic approach to his food. But broccoli is for blood in our house, and carrots are for night vision. And I'm just
imagining you telling your son, now carrots are for night vision, so you can see those monsters. You told me they weren't real.
No, I just say if you want to be a superhero like Spider-Man or, you know, Batman or any of the other heroes that he's currently obsessed with, then you need to eat your vegetables for your muscles. And do you think that Spider-Man can, that's probably more Batman, can leap buildings in a single bound?
That was Superman, man. Okay, just let's get these superheroes right.
I should know this is better. If it was a Star Wars reference, I would totally know it.
So you have gained a lot of your practical expertise in dealing with children from indeed your life experience of having your son. So tell me, because like you taught me a lot in how to get yucky medicines into kids. And some of them were the simplest things that I had forgotten, like, for instance, the Oxymel, the onion syrup. So can you take our listeners through a few of these simple home remedies that are just gold when dealing with these particular childhood, you know, coughs and colds and ills that can be, you know, really upsetting to parents or disrupting to parents. They just make you tired because your child's awake all night coughing. I learnt so much from that.
I think it's important for every parent to have an understanding of some home remedies, because if motherhood has taught me anything, children get sick on public holidays and at 11, 12 and 1 a.m. So you inadvertently need to have some of these things up your sleeve. They should almost teach them in, you know, parenting classes. But yeah, definitely onion syrup. I can't even remember who I'm sure it was another practitioner who said, "Why don't you try onion syrup?" And I went, "What is onion syrup?" And so now everybody who is in my life knows how to make onion syrup, and I make it for pregnant women
Yep.
and children, and it's so easy. It's practically laughable.
Ridiculously easy.
It's ridiculously easy. You chop an onion, and it can be the skankiest, ugliest onion in your jar. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a pretty onion. It doesn't matter if it's red or brown either, because that's the next question I always get. And you just chop it loosely and you toss it into a saucepan and cover it with a bit of water. So you want to make enough that you can be sipping on it for a day or two.
But there's a particular way of you layer it, don't you?
Yeah, well, you're thinking of where you slice an onion and you can put it into a jar, and then you put honey into it and basically just let the honey come through the onion and produce a very thick syrup.
Yeah, but it was a layer of onion, layer of honey, layer of onion, layer of honey, and then you top it up.
Yeah, but to be honest with you, it's not quick. You need to be letting that steep. Yeah. You need to be letting that steep for days and days. Like, realistically, you need to have that kind of thing ready to go, maybe in your fridge.
Right.
And you can, I think that's what, maybe that's like an oxymel, that's a bit different. For my onion syrup, I chop an onion, I put it into a pot, I cover it with a little bit of water, and I add whatever sweetener that I have. So under kids under 1 or 2, generally, you're supposed to avoid honey. So I've often made this just with, raw sugar or even rice syrup or something like that.
Yep.
But the sugar helps obviously make it palatable, but helps with drawing out some of the, sulfurous content, what have you. So, and you just boil it until the water starts to change colour and the onions start to go quite soft. At that point, you can strain it off, but I tend to leave the onions in it and just let it steep into a jar, and I throw it straight into the fridge. So really you can have that ready within sort of half an hour or so, where it's drinkable for anyone of any age because it's cooled down enough. Yep. So that's where I like fast remedies, because like I said, this kind of thing invariably happens in the middle of the night or on a public holiday, and you want something that you can have ready to go very quickly.
It seems to be one of the quickest, most soothing home remedies that's safe and really soothing for like irritated coughs and things like that.
Definitely. And you can add things to it if you want to. You can chop some ginger into it, although for little ones, sometimes that can be a bit spicy. Yeah. Same with garlic. I find sometimes they get a little bit funny about it being spicy. So I've tended not to do that, but I've definitely, for really dry and irritating cough, I often will add sage, not from my garden because my green thumb is dead, but my mother-in-law has a wonderful garden, so I will go and pick fresh sage from hers. But, if you don't have fresh sage, you can just, I've done it before, I've used powdered sage as well, which also helps to kind of soothe the cough. So, yeah, you can really experiment with it once you've got it, and it's not thick and syrupy, it's sort of liquidy. So I used to be able to put it straight into my son's bottle, and he would be able to have it when he was quite little, and he would just happily have that while he was sort of laying down while I wasn't feeling well, watching cartoons or whatever. So that it's probably one of the easiest things. These days, though, he's 4, so he's graduated to much more robust therapies. Like, I can get him to take very weak shots of apple cider vinegar now. Mm. I particularly use a herbal range called Kiwi Herb, which has got a bunch of immune therapies for kids, like a chest and cough syrup and what's called D-stuff for kids, which I use for clearing nose or airways if he's particularly mucousy. So, they're really easy. But, yeah, home remedies are brilliant. I've also used, in conjunction with, my products that contain elder, for example, for fever, somebody suggested to me trying egg socks. Well, I've never heard of that before.
Now tell me about this, because this is weird.
It is weird, and it's one of those...
I have horrible visions of hard-boiled eggs squished throughout the floor.
No. It's nothing quite that great. So with egg socks, you break an egg and you just get the egg white and you get a pair of socks and you soak the socks in it. And then you put the socks on the feet. And what I do is I usually throw a freezer bag over the top of that and another pair of socks. And so if everything else I've done hasn't kind of brought a fever under control, just adding that one extra element really helps to soothe a fever.
Really?
So I've watched that and it may not even have anything to do with the eggs. It might just be that it's so cold, but I have to wonder if, because of these eggs, and eggs have like a inositol content, sulfur content, if it is in fact having an effect. Obviously nobody's done a clinical trial, but I can tell you, when I've used my belladonna and I've used my pulsatilla or I've used my elderflower and nothing has brought the fever to a place where I'm comfortable, I only start to really get deeply concerned if there's fever with lethargy. But if I haven't brought back some of his vitality from everything else, then I'll try that, and I've found it to help. So, sometimes, like I said, in the middle of the night, you need something, you're a bit desperate, or you're waiting for your medication to kick in, some of these things to know what to reach for can be brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I think what interests me about these folk remedies, if you like, or these old wives' tales, quote unquote, is I always have to ask the question, okay, how did it start? And if it's an old wives' tale, how did it remain in circulation if it didn't work? Because surely, I haven't got time to go into it, but, these Aboriginals that crushed up the nuts of a cycad, washed them in a stream for 3 days and then made a bread. Okay, how did they learn that it was 3 days? How many people they go through? So it's kind of like this has happened over eons. So I think we need to start at least questioning it and going, hey, is there really something to this? Onion syrup, though, to me, like it's done. It's just, it works. It's awesome. But just moving on to something that it's at least got some evidence on its use, and that's chicken soup. But you need to be cautious about the chicken soup that you choose, correct?
Well, I wouldn't be choosing a chicken soup in a can because that's probably not going to do very much for your
whole lot of sugar
because they're packed full of sugar and salt. But I find making a chicken soup at home, and there's a million different ways to do it, but my way is pretty simple. If I've got pre-made chicken broth, well then great, I will use that, where I've boiled the bones and made a broth with, probably leek and carrot and onion and probably some thyme, and just kind of boiled it down and made like a great broth with a good gelatin base, which in itself has really great kind of protein and immune enhancing benefits.
Shout out to Pete Evans here.
Shout out Pete Evans, who's made broth cool. But, if I don't have that, then I'll just simply, I've always got chicken breasts in the freezer, so I'll just cut chicken breasts into really small pieces. I'll throw it into a pot. First what I do is I put garlic, chili, leave the chili out for the kids, but garlic, chili, ginger, and chopped onion in the bottom of a pan with a swig of oil, whatever you've got, whether it's olive oil or coconut oil. Please don't use vegetable oil, people. But, boil that down until the onions start to get a bit soft and it gets really fragrant. Then I add in I've boiled my kettle and I put my powdered vegetable stock, try go for a good brand always, and I mix that into the top. And then I add the chicken that I've diced and chopped up, and I let that kind of come to a boil. Once it's come to a boil, I lower it to simmer, and I actually have, in the meantime, beaten 2 eggs, and I pour that into my chicken soup and stir it rigorously, and it comes it looks like spider webs going into your chicken soup. Yeah. But what you've achieved with all of that chicken soup is you've got garlic, ginger, and onion, which is just a trifecta for good immune health. Particularly chili if it's for adults, as a driver for these things to our extremities. We're always taught in college to use turmeric and cayenne and things like that as drivers or circulatory stimulants. But so that trifecta, plus you've got the chicken for protein and it's really soothing. I also add curry powder because it just makes it taste awesome. Yeah. And then the egg as well for, how many different, it's such a complex food, egg with full protein and lots of kind of, mineral content and vitamins. So you've got this really delicious, really easy to digest, and very soothing and comforting food that you can have even when you can barely get off your deathbed.
Well, what about things? Oh, actually, firstly, I just want to point out that I think it's interesting how you spoke about the carcass of the chicken. And rather than going into it, my wife makes an awesome chicken soup with using the carcass of a roast chicken. But Nigella Lawson, I remember commenting that she'd go around to her friends' places, and if they had a chicken dish, she'd say, "Oh, can I have that carcass?" So she'd take these carcasses home from wherever she ate dinner, so that she could have a base for her broth. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, chicken broth made from chicken bones is to die for.
Yeah.
It's so tasty.
And the other thing was things like, apple cider vinegar. Like some people might frown, saying, "Oh, why are you giving that to kids?" and things like that. I think it's really interesting that we seem to have lost touch with these age-old foods that we have now. It's almost like we've tried to medicalise them. And therefore the medical profession frowns upon them because they're not a quote unquote medicine. So it's kind of like this real alienation from what 100 years ago people would be going, yeah, of course. Like it's really weird. I think it's really weird. We've lost touch with these base things and we're now overcautious. I can't say, obviously, to give honey to a child less than 12 months old because there seems to be some risk of botulinum. It does surprise me that these age-old foods that, have been eaten by the Hadza tribe in Africa for eons, still surviving, I don't know how many kids they lose to botulism each year from eating honey.
You're so right. There seems to be this flippant idea that doesn't matter what you eat, it won't affect your health outcomes. So I've seen this time and time again, as you know, looking after my grandmother's health over the years, and in particular in her final few years, she had a few issues with a gallbladder attack or acute infection, and I was just floored by the attitude by the medical team that were looking after her, that it wouldn't matter what she was eating. But I said to them, I beg to differ, because she was only eating jelly and ice cream.
Crazy.
And I'm like, you've switched her gallbladder off.
Yeah.
It's not having to do any work. So of course, it's like switching off a cement mixer. Things are going to get hard. You're not making that organ work and move. You need to be giving her, mashed potato with butter, and you need to be giving her, because she's on soft food, like whiz up her meats and add them all together and, turn them into baby food, but please don't give her sweets. And then sure enough, I was vindicated when she didn't get another attack at once I became quite strict with her diet. But it just really spoke to me of kind of like the attitude that medicine has to diet, that, just your diet doesn't give you any control over your health, and it is complete and total rubbish.
Mm-hmm. And they know this.
Is where it's at.
Yet if you mention dash 1 or 2, Predimed, Mediterranean diet, it'd be, yeah. So it's really funny. But I just want to move on a couple of things before we wrap up, and that is a soap and sugar poultice. I've never, ever heard of this, but I've heard you mention this. Can you take us through what this is? Where do you use it?
I've heard of this because of my husband's grandmother. For years, I would just buy a store-bought drawing cream if we got, splinters or anything like that. But my husband works in construction, so, parts of when he's drilling things, he'll often get, shards and shavings into his skin, and we've had some crazy things happen. And my son has an extreme fear of having splinters removed, and in the Montessori kinder she's at, the whole place is made of wood, so we deal with this a lot.
Yep.
But the soap and sugar poultice is, you can use any kind of soap. It doesn't matter if it's a hand pump soap or it's a bar of soap. The bar of soap tends to work more effectively, probably because of the tallow and all of that jazz. Mm-hmm. But if you mix your sugar with the soap and turn it into a paste, place it over anything that you need to draw out of the skin, and then just cover it with a Band-Aid. Not only will it soften the skin to make the removal really easy, but if you keep applying that day after day, it will eventually come out on its own.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't have known about that without my husband as a grandmother. I definitely didn't learn that as part of naturopathic college. It was just that maybe growing up and the way, I think, she would have had that remedy probably from her own mother, and they just, the whole family uses it. So, and it's so effective. I know I had a lady at hockey the other day, and she was limping, and she said, I must have got glass in my foot when I went camping, and she tried a few things to get it out and couldn't. And I said, put a soap and sugar poultice, and she looked at me like I had 3 heads. But the next day, 2 days later at training, she was there and she was running, and she went, I did that and it worked.
What about another one that might seem really strange? A ginger bug. What's that? Sounds like a lolly to me.
Ginger bug. Do you know ginger bug is something I learned about from a previous guest you had on the podcast, Dr. Sarah Lance.
Ah, yes.
So I actually went to a kombucha making class with her, and they taught the people of the class how to make a ginger bug. So I can't take any credit for the remedy, but definitely Butchie Kombucha share that remedy around, and it's pretty much it's a bit more involved. But when you put ginger and sugar and water into a canister and you steep it, it starts to create a fermentation that you get. Obviously, through fermentation, you increase enzyme content, you yield nutrients and what have you. And ginger in itself is a pretty powerful powerhouse of nutrients in it. So it looks like a really easy one for people sold on fermentation to kind of have it on the go all the time in the house for that stuff. It'd be really good for inflammation and wounds and wound care as well. But the thing that I probably use the most for all kinds of sick, but in particular so I can get to sleep at night, is I use Yuki Bear Rub just because it's petroleum free, but like a good lather of a
vapor rub sort of
thick kind of vapor rub cream onto the soles of the feet with a pair of socks on will actually, and if I hadn't witnessed this for myself, but it actually just stops nighttime coughing. So if any time my son is sick and you want to get some sleep in the night, definitely consider putting that on the feet. And it's another one of those ones that's really easy to tell parents that they can kind of have right there, that when they're woken up at 1 or 2 a.m. with a coughing child, they can just do that, and usually they'll sleep quite well. You know
what interests me there is that Chinese medicine will tell you that the cold enters your body through the feet and the back of the neck. And I just think it's really interesting that a lot of these Western remedies involve things that you apply to the feet. And I might just put out a caution here, because I have seen in years gone by somebody that put a garlic poultice onto their feet, put a sock on it overnight, and they got gangrene. So garlic, being extremely sulfurous, can be extremely dangerous if you don't watch it. And, admittedly, this person was probably somebody that suffered from diabetes, had peripheral neuropathy, couldn't sense the burning, and therefore it progressed. Having said that, I think it's something that we should shy away from unless we are crystal clear about the time limit that these things should be applied. But the things that you've mentioned are really safe.
I think people forget the volatile oils in garlic can be really.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things I like is the good old, that vapor rub type thing, just putting it on my back. I mean, I will do it as an adult, and even on my chest. If I've got a really stinking cold, I will still use it as an adult. And yes, I feel like a bit of a wimp when I'm doing it. But I think your interesting thing, the caveat there would be anybody who's got asthma, you've got to be really cautious with these vapors. But again, you say putting it on your feet, well, it's well away from the respiratory system, so I don't think it's going to cause a problem. So it's probably salient advice there.
Well, I always find putting it on feet with the little ones is better, but it's more effective. Like hands down, it is more effective, and possibly because you have more pores in your feet anyway for transmission of, if that even happens. But the thing that I don't have to worry about is it's really rare for your child to touch that site with socks on than if you put it on their chest and they rub their hand across it. Next thing it's in their eyes or, whatever. So I definitely think feet is the way to go with little people.
Yeah. What about things like a higher evidence supplement that's available on the market today? Indeed, this is a registered medicine. That's Caloba, pelargonium. Tell me about how you use that with your son and indeed other patients.
Well, the great thing about Caloba, and I should probably preface this with, over the last 12 months, obviously cough syrups in children under 6 have just been completely wiped from the market. And I mean, like the pharmaceutical ones.
The pharmaceutical ones, yes.
Yeah, you cannot get them for kids under 6. So it's been a real opportunity for natural medicine to really shine in that age group. And I first was introduced to Caloba at a conference through Blackmores because they sell it. But, you can get it as a herbal tincture, Pelargonium. It's been available for a really long time. It's just sort of one of those ones I'd perhaps forgotten about. But the really great thing about it is it's pleasant tasting. It's not horrible.
Well, Caloba is.
It's definitely.
Yep.
Well, no, I don't think it's not. It's really not. It's fresh tasting. It's not like a very strong herb like echinacea.
No, Caloba's nice, but Pelargonium as a fluid extract?
Look, Pelargonium is. I mean,
you really? Okay.
It is still pretty. It's fairly palatable compared to some other immune herbs that you might try and use. Like if you try to give angiographics to a child.
Oh, yeah, horrible. Sure absolutely. Yeah. And echinacea can be particularly challenging unless it's, in a particular medium like glycerin tract or honey.
I would only ever use it in a glycerin tract for kids because, it can be a bit punchy for them otherwise.
Oh, and scary, yeah. I think it's really interesting that my firstborn, his 5th word was echinacea. I was quite proud of that.
The thing is too, my son's been getting herbal and homeopathic remedies since he was, the first time he got unwell, which was probably around 5 or 6 months old, and he got a little cold. And now all I have to do is point a dropper in his direction, and he just opens his mouth and takes it. He doesn't even ask what it is. So that, I think, teaching them young is definitely says a lot. But I've used Caloba, in particular, sort of croupy bronchitis-like coughs. It's so great for that. And you can, there are instructions on that, and it's accessible for parents, on a public holiday and what have you, where they can give doses that, for kids up from 2 and up. So it's an easy one for them to access because, like I said, kids get sick on public holidays and nighttime.
That's right. Look, there's many other things that we could go through, not the least of which are some of the creams that you use and indeed I use with certain patient groups. But I think I'd like to investigate a few other of your hints and tips and tricks with regards to not just how you get medicines into kids, but how you use food, because you're a real foodie and I think social media has become an important resource for you. To not just use things for yourself, but also promote the use of good food. So we might investigate that in another podcast.
Sure thing.
So, Beck, thank you so much for going through those hints and tips today. I really appreciate them. I think they're quite funny, but I think you've gotten some really good messages. And I do like the way that you give practical messages to people. They're really important messages, like how to teach a child that it's good to choose good food. That it's really good fun sort of thing. I think they're great messages that we need to teach each other as a society.
Definitely. And it would have been taught that way, in more ancient times, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
In a tribal culture.
Days of yore.
They would be, through the hunting and gathering process, they would have been teaching this kind of those similar things. You pick this for this and you use that for that and this combines with this, and just because of the way society is set up now, I think we've lost a little bit of that teaching aspect of kids that we are often telling them, but forgetting we need to teach them.
This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook.